Working? Great. Great. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to reintroduce you really quick for those people that weren't here last week, if that's okay for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, fine.
Okay, all right. So we'd like to welcome you, Scott, to Tupten Kungaling. And oh, I've got somebody. Hold on one second. Okay, Scott is a mindfulness and Buddhist meditation teacher who has spent the last 2 decades exploring what it means to awaken the heart through the Buddhist path. He was ordained by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. He spent 9 years as a Buddhist monk, with much of that time engaged in solitary meditation retreat and study in the United States, India, and Nepal. He teaches meditation and Buddhist psychology internationally in group and one-on-one settings. So Scott, I'd like to welcome you and let me know when you're ready for me to put up the Refuge and Bodhichitta prayer.
Sure. Thanks everyone so much for joining again. And I see a lot of familiar faces from last week. And I don't know if there's anybody joining us anew, but you're most welcome. And since this is like concurrent, I'm building on each talk, right? If there's things that are confusing that you weren't in the last talk for, just ask me, right? So we'll have some Q&A and so yeah. So I'm joining you from the mountains outside of mountains of Colombia, outside of Bogota. Before I was near Medellin, and then we traveled here, and I have good Dharma friends here, and they very graciously offered to host the teaching here with some of their beautiful shrine. And also, I wish I could, maybe at the end I'll share with you, there's beautiful mountains here. So yeah, it's a nice environment, at least here, to give you to share this with you. So I feel really happy today. And yeah, so we can go ahead and start with the Refuge and Bodhichitta and then go from there.
Hang on one second. I have lost my screen. Are the prayers there or no?
Yeah, we see them. You can hit the green to expand them, but yeah, it's fine how it is.
Okay.
If everybody can see it.
So just make it a little bigger.
Yeah.
Like that?
There you go. Sure.
How's that?
Oh yeah, even better.
Okay. Okay, super.
So just briefly, I talked a little bit. Oh, it disappeared now. Yeah, it's there now. I talked a little bit about Refuge and Bodhichitta last Sunday, and I think most of you are familiar with Refuge and Bodhichitta, but just a quick reminder, we have these 3 outer refuges we're seeking meaning through, like living a meaningful life, as well as realizing the Dharma, which actually not only eliminates suffering, but brings the qualities of Buddhahood where we can really, truly benefit others. And so there's the 3 outer refuges of the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, right? The Dharma being the primary refuge, because it's through the Dharma that we study the path, we engage in the reflection and the practice or the meditation of those teachings, and we slowly but surely gain experience of our Buddha nature, right? And uncover that. So but that outer refuge is not enough. We have to reflect on the inner refuge as well, which is that each and every one of us, no matter if we think we're the best person ever or the worst person ever, or if we're judging someone else as evil or good or whatever, every single sentient being has this awakened nature we call Buddha nature, right? And this awakened nature is not a thing, but it can manifest the qualities of freedom, of Buddhahood. And so it's because each and every sentient being, including ourselves, has this Buddha nature that we can actually traverse the path and attain Buddhahood. So we remember that also when we're chanting Refuge. Otherwise, Refuge runs the risk of turning into only a theistic practice, meaning we're seeking someone else to rescue us. And actually, the Dharma is there as a remedy, as a medicine. It is there to help, I don't like the word rescue, but benefit us. But we are the ones who have to rescue ourselves. And the teacher, as the Buddha, or our personal teachers in human form, they're there to help us figure that out. They're there to help us, to encourage us, to bring what we call jinlap, or blessings, to teach us all of these factors, to create community to practice. But we have to do it, right? And so we primarily do it by engaging the Dharma via turning inwards to the mind to see our Buddha nature, right? To reveal that Buddha nature more and more. So actually chanting Refuge, even though it seems like a kind of like a religious practice when we chant it and all that, it actually is a way to familiarize the mind with Buddha nature. It's a way to remember, okay, I have the qualities of Buddha nature that are innate to my being that I can bring out. Sometimes in the Sutrana vehicle, we would say this is more of a potentiality. Like we have the potential to attain enlightenment because we have Buddha nature. So either way you want to look at it is fine, in my opinion. So so with that, then we grow the Bodhichitta, right, which is also in sort of part of our chant today before the teachings. And we turn our mind towards recognizing not only do I have Buddha nature, but all sentient beings have Buddha nature. And therefore, all sentient beings are deeply, innately worthy. You know, we don't have to prove our worth. We don't have to become somebody to become worthy, nor does anyone else. And so we start to reflect our own mirror, our own what we would call like pure view towards others, right? And then we can authentically grow bodhicitta, right? So I said last week, bodhicitta is not really becoming a savior, though some of the language can look like that, right? It's actually really understanding what the causes of suffering are, eliminating those causes for oneself, understanding the causes of happiness, adopting those, and then traversing the path to Buddhahood for the benefit of others. Because if we're not understanding our mind correctly, if we're lost in our own misperceptions, how are we going to help others, right? And actually, when we go to help others, there's a big risk that we're going to like kick up more dirt. I sometimes say, you know, we're going to muck up more. So we're kind of in this tricky situation because we do need to help others from where we're at right now. You know, if someone needs water, we give them water. If they need money, we give them money. If they need Dharma, we give them Dharma. But we also have to recognize really the benefit that comes from bringing our awakened nature out fully into Buddhahood is where the benefit's going to really come from. Now, for some of you who are newer to Buddhism, don't worry about this too much. I'm just kind of introducing this because it can sound like a religious belief. But actually, when we start to meditate, we start to see directly our Buddha nature, and then it ceases to become a religious belief. And then we can engage these kinds of chants and practices with a fully open heart, understanding why we're chanting. So the chanting becomes a skillful means to bring this nature out for the benefit of all beings, right? On a very simple level, it also just becomes a way to turn our mind away from self-preoccupation. Because from a Buddhist perspective, you know, when we're talking about working skillfully with emotions, what is the skill? It's understanding that the emotion is nothing whatsoever, yet it's going to continue to arise, right? So we have to see that for ourselves, that the emotion is like space. It's like a cloud passing through the sky. But when we personalize it and take it so seriously, we further compound our suffering, right? And we further compound our misperception. And so when we orient the mind of bodhicitta through taking refuge and generating it through chanting here, we're actually reorienting why we're studying the Dharma, like in this moment, why we're going to reflect on it and why we're going to meditate on it. So it reorients the mind over time to something away from self-preoccupation, and another way to say it, from like sort of temporary fix-it methods, right? So Buddhist meditation is not for just like removing the situation and finding some blissful peace on a mountain, you know? Maybe in the beginning, this can be inspiring for us, like to think of it like that. But as we practice more, we start to see, no, we have to go through the experience. We have to go through the suffering. We have to go through the emotion. And I know this isn't like the greatest news, and maybe some of you don't want to hear that, and maybe you're not ready to hear that, and that's okay. But you know, it's my job to share the Dharma here in an authentic way, at least what I think is authentic to what my teachers teach me and what I practice. And so for me, like trying to run away from my emotions didn't work. Trying to shove them in a corner and find some shamatha peace over here didn't work. We have to use shamatha to then look into the emotion and go through to see its wisdom nature. So each emotion has a wisdom nature. Each emotion actually in itself, when we liberate that emotion, it has a quality that the clinging, the fixation around the emotion can break, but it doesn't mean the emotion gets shoved somewhere. So this is tricky when we're beginners and intermediate practitioners, because it doesn't feel like that. You know, we get caught in our emotions, we get stuck, we get we suffer, we ruminate in the emotion. But what we have to constantly do is try to see that emotion for what it is and how it is. So one way to do that is through remembering the Buddha nature, supplicating the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for help, which is also part of the outer refuge, and then generating the Bodhichitta, which shifts the mind from just wanting to attain momentary happiness to actually what's going to be sustainable long-term. We could say sort of in the text, they, you know, one term they use is great bliss. And bliss has this meaning in English that sometimes means it's always going to feel good, and like I don't know, I visualize like a Grateful Dead, you know, dancing thing. You know, no offense if you like that kind of thing. But great bliss means something a little bit different, because it's the bliss of knowing the nature of reality. And here, more specifically, knowing the nature of the emotion. And when we know the nature of the emotion, everything becomes food, right? Everything becomes appearances that becomes food for knowing that nature. The nature just like, it's like a fire and you throw gas on it and it just burns, right? In a good way. So the Buddha sometimes they describe his awakening as great bliss, sometimes as peace, beyond constructs, luminous. So there's all these kinds of words we use to describe something that's ineffable, that's beyond description. So we need to use the words to point us in the right direction. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're using words to point us in the right direction. So again, forgive me if this is something you're already familiar with and it's super boring and all that. But, you know, for me, I remind myself of this every day. And even if we think we know, we don't know until we know. So if you know, wonderful, I prostrate to you. But, you know, the knowing has to be deep down, like in the guts, like where the thinking mind, it's not a knowing from the thinking mind, it's a knowing from our very being, right? And then we continue to let that expand. Anyways, without further ado, we'll do some preliminary chanting. So orient your mind to that. We'll just take a second. I'm going to be quiet just for a minute. And I want you to reflect on what I just said in whatever way you can relate to that. So then when we chant, you can meditate with what we're chanting on. So I'm just going to leave a second of silence, or a minute. Okay, so we'll chant together once in Tibetan, once in English, and then a third time in Tibetan. Sangye chodan sogi chonama chancho bardo dani kyamsu chi dagi chunyen ki pesonam ki chola penchir sangye drupar sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodan sogi chonama chancho bardo dani kyamsu chi Age chunyen ge pesonangi chola penshir sangye drupar sho. So really orient your mind to Bodhichitta, the mind that, at least in aspiration, wishes to bring about Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, recognizing that as the really ultimate way we can benefit others. Okay. Thank you so much. So kind of just a recap of last week, and then we'll build on that. So my thought for this series was to really share like the core practices for me that help me to work with my emotions in a more skillful way, and then also to connect those to the general Buddhist teachings and Buddhist path, the paths of we could say the three pillars of ethical conduct, meditative awareness, and non-dual wisdom, or the prajnaparamita, the wisdom that goes beyond. So these are really the three pillars of the Dharma. And as I said last week, in order to engage those three pillars in a skillful way, we need to get to know our emotions. We need to be intimate with our emotions. We need to understand and experience that we can't find some kind of enlightenment outside of the emotion, from my perspective. Now, this is using a little bit more of a Vajrayana flavor or a Mahamudra flavor. This flavor of going through the experience to see the nature of the experience, right? So sometimes we can recognize the nature of that experience and then allow that experience to open. Sometimes we need to go through the experience to experience the nature of that experience. And by nature, what do I mean? What is an emotion? You know, when we talk about nature, we mean, what is the essence of an emotion? What is it actually, right? So we're going to start exploring that a little bit more this session. But as a preliminary for that, last week I shared some embodied awareness techniques. We just started to dive into that. And primarily, we have this technique of dropping and handshaking. And so these are practices coming from, so my main teachers are Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the FPMT organization and tradition, and Soni Rinpoche. And Soni Rinpoche and Lama Zopa happen to be good friends, so that's always nice. And Soni Rinpoche has a certain style where he recognizes, as modern practitioners, often we are really stuck in the head. You know, we're really stuck in, you know, trying to organize the Dharma and understand it in the thinking mind, but there's all this stuff that's unaddressed in the body, right? We can call some of this emotional content, or, you know, in psychology, they might use the word trauma. He doesn't use the word trauma. He uses the word beautiful monsters, which is a really, really kind term. And we learn how to work with our beautiful monsters, be they an emotion, a sensation, like a stuck energy in the body, by dropping and letting be with the experience. So at first, when I came into contact with this particular teaching, I was really bad at it, bad at practicing it. And I had no idea really what it meant, because my framework, as I explained last week, most of my life has been to suppress emotions I don't like, and or just sort of mindlessly become the emotion, right? And so what we're learning to do when we let be with the experience in the body is not to mindlessly become, because we're staying aware of the experience, but also not to suppress. So this edge of not accepting and not rejecting is what we're working with. And we're just not going to be good at that right away, most likely. So it's not something we like succeed at. It's something we get used to. It's something we train in, and it starts to become our life. It starts to become the way we orient first towards our own emotional experience in the body, and then of course to that world around us. So it's like a layers of things we start to connect with. So I do want to engage with you and just see how the practice has been going in a few minutes. But this practice of embodied awareness, or handshaking, or dropping, that Sonia Rinpoche teaches, these are all ways to not only engage the Dharma. It can be like a pre.
Sorry, Scott, I think I accidentally.
No worries. Y'all can hear me okay so far? Okay. So it's almost like a pre-preliminary. So we have the preliminaries in Tibetan Buddhism generally, which so in some lineages they call the nundro is like a nundro means to come before, or preliminary. It's like the 4 times 100,000, and the Nyingma and Kagyu, they tend to do that. In the Gelugpa, we have 9 nundros, water bowls, offerings, making tsatsas, prostrations, vajrasattva, etc. And there's also the common preliminaries of the Lam Rim, training in the lower, medium, and higher scopes of the Lam Rim, first by studying, then by reflecting and gaining conviction and an understanding, and then meditating on that understanding in order to transform one's mind conceptually, right? And then based on those preliminaries, we engage the main practices of training in the 6 perfections, and primarily the wisdom nature of emptiness, and training in all the practices through the middle way view of that. And also we have Mahamudra and other techniques. And of course, then we have Tantrayana or Mantrayana, where we train in the unification of compassion and wisdom via Data Yoga practice, and all these other things. So I'm just kind of laying out the Tibetan Buddhist path in a brief way. But nonetheless, there's this pre-preliminary, what often we aren't taught culturally, or we don't learn how to do, which is to be kind to our emotions, to be kind to our experience. Now, this is tricky, because normally we think, well, the kindness is like, I'm having a really hard day, I'm going to just go, take a nice bath, and, have a nice meal and watch Netflix or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we need to do that. But if we're doing that, and at the same time actually not feeling the feeling in the body, it doesn't really help so much. It's sort of like shutting down the computer, like there's a virus in the computer, and we just sort of power it down and hope when we turn it back on, the virus is gone. But we actually have to do something to clean that virus. And, it's not like this is a virus, what we experience, but there's some confusion there. And so these preliminaries I shared with you last week, and we'll do a little bit of now, is to learn how to connect with the feeling in the body and let be with that feeling. And then we train in that letting be, right? So that's the kind of theory behind this. And what that does is it gives us more facility to work with our emotions, and actually more groundedness in the body. So then when we train in the main practices of shamatha and vipassana, there's more ability, there's less clutter, there's more space, right? So for me, the way I integrate this practice is I do it as much as I can. It's kind of informal. I just do it whenever there's an experience, when there's a feeling. It's a clue not to think about that. It's a clue to drop into the body and to feel the feeling with awareness and let be. So I usually tell people I work with, more in depth, who I work more in depth with, I say, if it's a feeling, it rarely needs to be thought about, actually. Because the feeling world doesn't communicate in conceptual language, right? It doesn't have the same kind of verbs and words we use. So when we separate for a long time, when we suppress our emotions, there's a separation where the thinking mind is kind of running in its own way, and the feeling world is running in its own way, and they're not clicking or communicating with each other. So we need to reconnect that, but we reconnect that by dropping the thinking mind into the body, dropping the judgment about whether the experience is bad or good, the emotion is feels good or feels bad, and we attempt to be with it. And I say attempt because obviously for each of us, this is going to be unique and different. And we can't take a cookie cutter approach of, we're not trying to force anything onto the emotion. We're just letting the emotion be, and we're connecting it with it, we're feeling it, and we're remaining with awareness. So the mind is aware and the feeling is feeling, or the body is feeling, right? So what this does over time is reconnects. And it's a little bit, it requires patience. It requires to try to relax and let this have its own time, because the mind understands very quickly, right? Especially because, most of us who end up in Buddhism in the West, where we get attracted to it, we have a lot of thinking mind education behind us. So we read the Dharma, we devour books, we go to teachings, now we can go to Zoom teachings with so many different lamas all over the world, which is really beautiful. But we can sometimes get obsessed with this training the thinking mind, which is important. But then if we don't train that thinking mind to sort of into experience, it just remains at the level of thought. And not only that, we can get frustrated because we can have all this understanding of, let's say, even deep Buddhist things like emptiness and middle way view and Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, but we don't know how to bring it into experience. So for me, the way to bring it into experience is we have to kind of pretend we're more stupid, right? And I don't mean that literally, like none of us are stupid, right? But pretend. Like I have to pretend sometimes with myself, I'm a little bit more dumb, because the other sides of our experience, the less conceptual, they're actually quite smart, but not smart in thinking smart, right? In conceptual smart. So sometimes we think, well, this is not worth it because they're not smart, like conceptual smart. But conceptual smart is sometimes stupid, right? And I'm not insulting anybody. Like again, none of you are stupid. I'm not stupid. But sometimes the conceptual mind thinks it knows, but it actually has no idea of the actual experience. So we need to use the conceptual mind, right, to understand the Dharma. But we also need to know when to drop the conceptual mind. And that's what this practice is, because the like I said, the feeling world doesn't speak the same language as the conceptual mind. And so just before we practice, I encourage you to do this practice formally if it's new to you. So do it in a quiet place where you have some space, there's nothing else going on. Get used to meeting the feelings in the body, whether they're comfortable, unpleasant, whatever. And then slowly you bring it into the life. Slowly you bring it into situations that are more challenging for you, or you're driving the car or at the bank or whatever, and some really strong, beautiful monster arises. And then you have the facility to meet it. You have the facility to meet it wherever it arises, and even with difficult people or difficult situations. So we had a question last week about controlling emotions. And actually, this is almost the opposite. We're dropping the control of the emotion so the emotion doesn't control us. So how does the emotion not control us? Through allowing it to let be, but preserving the sense of awareness or watchfulness in the mind. But the watchfulness isn't a boss. It's not above the feeling. It's not like, how do you say it? It's not like a dictator over the feeling. The awareness has no judgment at all. It's not, the thinking mind has a lot of judgment. And we need that judgment sometimes, right? Like if you're crossing a street, you need to have the judgment where to walk so you don't get hit by a car, right? That's totally fine. But in the feeling world, we need to drop the judgment and just let be and feel the feeling. So without further ado, we'll practice a little bit together. So just find a space if you haven't already, where you can feel at ease in your body, but at the same time, a little bit alert, right? And so, as I said, if you want to know more about what I'm sharing now, really, so Sonny Rinpoche is the source. So Patty has some links, and you can kind of research him. And for me, it's always important to say where these things come from. They're not mine, right? And of course, they're not really his either. He also made them. He brought some Mahamudra teachings in, some somatic practice, and then trained with himself, and then shares it with students, and then sees how it goes. But if you want to know more, I encourage you to go to the source. But I'm going to share directly what he's shared with me and others. So go ahead and just move the body a little bit, find some ease in the body if you want to stretch or move. And we'll practice for, what time is it? We'll practice for maybe 10 minutes. And you can close your eyes for this one. If at any point you feel overwhelmed by your internal experience, your emotion or energies or sensations, open your eyes. It really helps. Open your eyes and look around. Just orient yourself. But otherwise, you can close them. And what we're going to do first is a practice called dropping. So if you watch me for just a second, this is a little bit forceful in order to break the conceptual mind for a moment, to drop into the body. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a lot of trouble just finding space in the conceptual mind. It's just thought after thought. So here we're gonna drop, and don't hurt yourself, but a little bit vigorously slap our knees or legs. And with that, we're gonna say ha. So ha is a Sanskrit syllable we use in Vajrayana Buddhism to break the conceptual mind. And we're gonna say it a little bit forcefully. So it's gonna look like this. Ha. And the third aspect is we have the physical, the verbal, the mind or the thinking mind drops into the body, right? And you drop the concept and just try to be with the feeling. So we'll do this on 3 together. 1, 2, 3, drop. You ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Ha! And just drop into the body. Meet whatever's arising, whatever that feeling is. Sometimes there's a blankness, and that's okay. Just be with the blankness. There's nothing in particular you need to be feeling. Just feel what's arising for you now. And meet that feeling and let be with that feeling, which means aware, connected, and just feeling that. You don't have to look for that. It could just be the physical feeling first, like maybe the feeling of your body in the seat or your abdomen. And then just allow this connection to the feeling world to unfold. It can be more gross, like a physical feeling, or more subtle, like an energy, a subtler sensation, or just an emotion, if that's up for you right now, or a mood. And just let be with that mood. Don't try to control it. Don't try to manipulate or fix it. We're also not suppressing, rejecting it. We're also not indulging or becoming it. We're just letting the phenomena of emotion take place, the phenomena of embodied experience take place. Don't look for peace, but if peace comes, awesome, be with the peace. But don't look for it. We're not trying to make the meditation happy. We're just trying to be with what's here. And if happy is there, awesome. But if something else is there, something uncomfortable, something unknown, or maybe there's fear, see if you can allow that. And we allow through the kindness of non-judgment. Drop the thinking mind into the body. You can do it now internally. Just drop. You may need to drop every couple of minutes when you're getting used to this kind of practice. There's really nothing to find. There's nothing to attain, but there is something to be with. And that is whatever's arising in the feeling world, emotion, sensation. Sometimes we call subtle body energies, like more subtle energies, the movement of those in the nervous system and the channels. Okay, so let's drop one more time together. So on 3, we're going to do it the same way with a little more force. So 1, 2, 3. Ha! Just drop. Let go, but don't check out. So again, don't try to be too smart. Some of us are going to have this tendency when we feel the emotion, automatically the mind comes in wanting to help. Oh, I know what this is. I know where it came from. This happened with your sister yesterday and blah, 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 or whatever it is, right? Just drop that thinking mind. So we have to let the thinking mind know, thank you so much. We know you're super helpful. We know you're super smart. You can figure out like which moment of childhood produced this thing in my body. But right now that doesn't matter actually, because the feeling just wants us to connect with it. It wants us to meet it with kindness. It's like a small kid. When we have a beautiful monster, it's like a small kid who's wounded and they're screaming for attention, or they're angry, or they're throwing a tantrum, right? And is it good to try to reason with that kid? Oh, you didn't sleep so well last night, so this is why you're having a tantrum. Just calm down. I don't think that ever works with kids. But when you meet the kid in a way that meets them fully and allows their experience to unfold, eventually they can start to find connection and warmth. The same here. I consider my beautiful monsters like small children, like my kids. And there are parts of me that I'm 41 now that aren't 41. Maybe they're stuck at 5 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old. And they don't need me to tell them they're wrong or, grow up or, don't you understand? They don't need me to do that. They need me to meet them and feel them. So just allow that for yourself. And again, whatever's coming up for you is fine. There might not be a big, beautiful monster right now, but sometimes when we allow like this, we give them a chance to come out of the woods. And some of them, are happy you're giving them that chance, and some of them are really pissed off. So we also have to work sometimes with resistance, handshaking or meeting the resistance, meeting the pissed off emotion, the uncomfort. But we don't respond, we allow and meet. It's very flexible, it's very open. Just letting the eyes gently open. See if you can stay with the body here. Sometimes opening the eyes just shifts the experience a little bit, so we connect with this embodied awareness, this meeting or handshaking practice, not rejecting or suppressing, not indulging, not running away, but also not trying to fix or control. When we open the eyes, there's a little bit more sometimes like panoramic experience, but stay in the body. Don't get caught with what you're looking at. Just let that appear, what you're looking at. So again, here, the practice is going through the experience. And we find openness in the experience, but the openness is inside the emotion. It's not pushing the emotion away to find openness. It's actually, the emotion is openness. That's its nature. But we have to go through and let that come out. We can't try to force that experience. We just have to wait with the experience, wait with the feeling. Drop your expectations, drop your ideas of what you should be feeling, of what's good, of what's bad. And we have to trust a little bit because this is not easy. It takes a little bit of guts or courage. And over time, we're going to trust this more. And what we learn to trust is to drop the conceptual mind when the feeling world needs us to be with it. And then we can use our conceptual mind skillfully when we need to use that. And we start to discern, when do I need to use the thinking mind? When do I need to just drop and be with the feeling? And experientially, we start to discover this. So it's all about experience, not about theory. So we need the theory to point us in the right direction, right? So open your eyes if you didn't already. Try to practice just for a minute with open eyes. Okay. Thanks very much. So this is essentially kind of these two aspects of dropping, which is kind of the first one we want to familiarize ourselves with. We don't have to do anything, we just drop and be. And the handshaking comes when something uncomfortable or something challenging comes in our experience, where we learn to meet that embodied challenge without suppressing, without becoming, without trying to control or fix it or run away. So that obviously is a training, like what some of you experience. So just to reiterate, we're not going to be able to do that right away, most likely, depending on your makeup and your lifestyle. And I don't know all of you, so it just depends on you. But for me, this is an ongoing process that unfolds. And instead of like, oh, I'm going to find some peace over here someday, the more I do this practice, I'm just going to find that perfect experience. We have to let go of that. So as we go deeper into the Buddhist teachings today and the next two talks, this is a really tricky thing, because sometimes, I don't mean to be crude with this, but like Buddhism is sold to us as like, it's going to create this peace that's beyond samsara. No, nirvana is the samsara. Samsara is the nirvana. And we have to slowly get experience through that. And really, for me, of course, this is more with that concept of the unification or the inseparability of samsara and nirvana is really in the Vajrayana teachings. But really, it's embedded in the most foundational teachings of the Buddha, in the First Noble Truth. So, we engage the First Noble Truth conceptually, right? So some of you studying the Lam Rim, you may have reflected on the nature of suffering, the three types of suffering, all of these kinds of things. And these are really wonderful to bring understanding and experience of what predicament we're in, to really bring that to the forefront. But at the same time, we really need to stop running away from our suffering, right? And of course, we have to do this within our own means. For me personally, there's some elements of my suffering that are just untouchable right now, right? Like when I get sick, I'm a baby. I turn into a baby. So, you know, some of that is untouchable for me. And then some emotions, some emotional experiences are beautiful monsters that I have were untouchable 10 years ago and are completely fine right now, meaning the emotion is the emotion. The beautiful monster changes a little bit, it opens a little bit, but it's not so much that the emotion changes, it's our approach to that emotion, right? So I really want to reiterate that. It's the skill or the training we get of how to face our suffering. And then that begins to transform it because we start to see eventually the suffering is actually nothing whatsoever, right? So it's very tricky to see this because when we're in a moment of pain, when we're in a moment of distress, it seems so real. When there's an emotion that's really strong, whether it's anger or clinging or jealousy or sadness or whatever, it feels so real, right? But we need something to start to question that reality. Is it really like that, right? And this is what the Dharma gives us. But again, just to not sound like a broken record, if we just go to that and while being disembodied, I feel it's a little bit of a danger, right? So we need the right amount of embodied, being able to feel, and the right amount of being able to think, right? And understand the Dharma so that we can apply it to cut through the misperception. So I think right now, I'd love to hear from you all. So I what I recommended last week was I opened this practice up. I think today it got a little more flushed out. So hopefully you have a little bit more of an idea of it or experience of it. But I'd love to hear if you've been practicing throughout the week, because I did really hope that you guys would take this into your daily practice, because the more you do that, the more experience you're going to come into, and then sometimes questions come out of that. And those questions are important because it's relating to your experience, not just the ideas of it. But of course, if you have theoretical questions, that's fine too. But I just want to welcome both. So I think feel free to just, should they unmute themselves, Patty, or how?
Yeah, sure, that would be fine. Unmute or use the raise hand signal. I do think you have one question in the chat, Scott.
Okay. Patty, do you mind reading the question out loud from the chat?
No problem. The question is it okay if tears start to flow during the meditation? Question mark. As long as we don't overcling to that happening? Question mark.
Yes, good. So I can't say definitively for each person, but when that's happening, it means something's opening, you know? When I cry during this practice, just from my own experience, it's like finally, it's like a dry dirt that finally is getting water because we're allowing and we're not repressing or trying to control it. So a lot of the time, emotions can come up like that. You know, they can kind of burst out in tears or a strong experience. And sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's more subtle, right? So it doesn't mean you're doing it right or wrong either way, but definitely that can happen. And in my experience, that's usually a good sign because we're finally allowing an opening. Now, that line between not suppressing and not becoming or indulging is very fine. It's a very fine line. So you just have to continue to practice to experience that fine line. I don't think it's like it's not a black and white thing. You know, it's not like, oh, you nailed it perfectly and you know, like that. And now the practice is perfect. I think initially some of us are working with suppression. So we're first just trying to stop suppressing and trying to feel and just drop and allow whatever needs to arise. And then second, we're actually working with the indulging part. And so having the emotion, having tears or a strong reaction, verbally or physically from feeling the emotion is not necessarily indulging, right? So what is indulging? Indulging is when we lose the awareness. Here's where it starts to connect into traditional meditative awareness practices, right? Like shamatha or vipassana. So when we lose the awareness, we are the feeling, we are the emotion, right? So we don't want to lose the awareness, but if we're so conscious, I don't want to become the emotion, we could also suppress it. So it's just this fine line, not suppressing, but there's a very light awareness that can watch or become watchful of the experience, and the experience can unfold. So it's like, I think sometimes we might think, myself included, that we find enlightenment again, or we find the nature of mind, or emptiness, or shamatha, or whatever practice we're doing, we find it like in some other space outside of the experience. But actually, it's within the experience, like I keep saying. So just through continuing to practice, that's just going to be known more and more. So wonderful. I'm really glad you're opening, and I hope it's a good opening for you, meaning it's you're able to open and experience something liberating, right? So as long as it's liberating, then that's a good clue. Oh yeah, it's not so much indulging.
Great, thank you. Another question is, isn't feeling by definition good, bad, or neutral?
Yeah, so this is where you get into relative and absolute discussions. So in like the philosophical Dharma, specifically within Madhyamaka teachings, or the middle way teachings, they really put an emphasis on these categories of relative truth and absolute truth, right? And this is a really deep thing to understand, let alone experience, because, you know, normally we are, you know, completely caught in the relative truth. There's no sense of an absolute truth or an openness, right? There's just, this is how it is, how the emotion is appearing is how it is. This person sucks and they're going to always suck, or this person is great and they're always going to be great, right? All of our judgments, all of that. So this is being stuck in the relative. And this is essentially, we could say, this is the part of the nature of samsara, to be confused, where we're misperceiving reality and getting stuck in one small sliver of it, right? Absolute truth is the openness of everything. It's that when we actually try to find that person we like or dislike, we can't find that. When we try to look for the thought that believes that, we can't find that. When we try to look for the person who believes that, we can't find it. But yet it appears, right? So the relative appears, but it's like an illusion. It's like a rainbow. So the Buddha said this many times throughout different sutras. You know, we have the Heart Sutra, the Vajracutter Sutra, where he uses these analogies, you know, like a lamp, like an illusion. You know, sometimes a rainbow is used because these appear and they feel so solid, but when we try to find them, we can't. And so, so the relative and absolute, they have to become we know that we're actually understanding the views within Buddhism correctly when we start to understand both of these two truths, and we start to understand them, that they're also inseparable, right? They're not two things. They come, it's like two sides of one coin. And then of course, when we have that experience, we're starting to become free. So famously in the Lamsum, which is Lama Tsongkhapa's Three Principal Aspects of the Path, which is one of my favorite texts, he points out very specifically within that text, when we see the moment I'm paraphrasing, when we see something relative and we can see that it actually has no solid or permanent or independent nature. And then on the reverse, when we can see, because it has no solid or independent nature, we also see that it has a relative function. When these two are not like fighting with each other, basically, we're perceiving the correct middle way view, right? And so there's lots of great masters throughout Tibetan Buddhism who have pointed this out in different ways. So getting to the question now, I just wanted to give it some context, is that relative truth, so an emotion being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is a relative truth, right? And so the Buddha, in his skillful means, in the foundational vehicles of Buddhism, he just wants us to start to understand mind and understand conceptual mind, mental factors, karma, cause and effect, all the things that are relative. Karma is also relative. Karma actually doesn't exist truly, but it appears to us and we experience karma. So we have to take care of our behaviors, right? Through body, speech, and mind. But nonetheless, So whether something is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is really a relative phenomena. So in its nature, it's beyond being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. But even within the beyond, it can appear as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So I don't mean to be confusing, but this is just the way the teaching is, right? And so in the foundational vehicle, this can be a skillful means because we're just trying to cultivate awareness through recognition. Another way to think of this is like, first we have to understand mind, because a lot of us, we don't understand mind. We just see a self and what's out there, and then we project, right? But we have to come close to see, who's the one seeing that? What is the thing that is experiencing that? And so one of the skillful means is to track emotions as this is unpleasant, this is pleasant, this is neutral, but we're not tracking it to judge it. We're tracking it to cultivate awareness. So this is through the 4 foundations of awareness, or 4 foundations of mindfulness, right? So you have mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of phenomena. And so you watch each of these experiences. On the feeling level, you watch the nature of the emotion, the relative nature being unpleasant, neutral, and pleasant. And slowly over time, you actually start to see that kind of breaks down. So via the relative, you start to experience the absolute, right? Now, this handshaking practice, or this kind of style of working with one's body and emotions, it's a little more Mahamudra flavor. So you're not trying to see anything whatsoever. You're just allowing the unfolding of mind, emotion, and experience, and you're watching. This is one way to practice Mahamudra. So in the Gelug tradition, we have this text on Mahamudra by the Panchen Lama, Panchen Losang Choki Gyaltsen, which is a wonderful text. And in there, he describes this practice. You simply, we either use analysis, where we question the experience, like we investigate, we analyze, or we can also just simply watch, right? We could simply just look back towards the emotion. But just to put this practice in context, it can also just be used as a preliminary, where we're simply just learning to feel again, right? So it doesn't have to have all these profound implications of emptiness and all this kind of thing. Eventually it will go there. But in the beginning, it's just learning to feel, learning to stop blocking experience. So anyways, I hope that helps, just to put some context.
Lisa has her hand up. You want to go ahead and unmute, Lisa?
Yes, thank you. So, Scott, I love how simple you made it sound. Emotion is only an emotion, which is true. And I love the fact that what you said, something like some are buried deep and some are ready to surface, or something of that nature. You mentioned. So obviously sometimes that's more easier said than done. So when you're dealing with a deep emotion of say like fear, or something that paralyzes you, I recently overcame a certain point in my life that I was struggling with on a particular topic, where I just said, I'm done with this fear. It does me no purpose. It's not useful to me. And I said, it's just not invited anymore. And I feel like I released it, at least in this one part of my category that I'm dealing with. But is it really gone? Did I really conquer it? That's number one. Is it going to show its ugly face again at another time? That's one particular area. And the other area would be something that's buried so deep inside of you. We all have these demons that are so deep inside of us that we don't even realize it prevents us from moving forward in certain parts of our life. So do you have any advice or feedback in those two areas?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, I have kind of like maybe 3 parts here. The first part is just like maybe more practical and relatable also to all of us, which is, working with something like a paralyzing fear. we just go slowly, right? Because we're not trying to fix anything. We're not trying to conquer anything with this kind of style of practice with emotions. So what we do is, what I recommend when it's paralyzing or overwhelming is find a place in the body that is somewhat neutral, and there's lots of places. We just often don't, orient to them, like the feet or the legs or the seat or somewhere else. This is why the breath is so helpful in foundational Buddhist training, because it's something more neutral for most people. So when you orient to something more neutral, you just hang out there, and it's pretty boring, because there's not usually much going on in the feet, for example. You start to orient your mind there and awareness there, and then slowly you can start to open up like an awareness of the greater body, including where this paralyzing fear might be. And then you sort of, in Western psychology, they have this term titrate, which I like, where you titrate, you move towards the the fear a little bit, but really the attitude has to be, there has to be a little guts. I'm willing to feel the fear, and I'm okay if this doesn't get fixed right now. Like, I'm okay if this doesn't resolve within this practice session. And then you just move towards the fear, and then you can move back to the place that's neutral. You move towards the fear, you move back. So there's lots of different ways to kind of be more gentle in this practice too, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Trying to remember your other two things. I think I remember the second one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, again, there's many styles to working with emotions, and I'm not saying this is the only one. This is just one that I found really helpful, and I feel really connects into the deeper aspects of Buddhist practice, specifically like working with this experience of self, working with this experience of how we solidify our reality, and then we suffer because of that solidification. Or sometimes we say making it independent, right? Like it exists on its own and it's permanent. And it's not like we believe that intellectually, but we believe that unconsciously sometimes because it's a habit. So there's lots of styles we can use. Analytical meditation to cut through that experience, like analytical, like it sounds like you used a little bit of an analytical meditation, a little bit, and that's wonderful. And sometimes that can work, but meaning work to like experience a new level of relationship to that emotion, right? But at the same time, sometimes there's remnants of it that just need to be felt in the body. And that's where I find this style of practice really helpful, because you're fully letting go and you're not trying to fix the experience. So in the beginning, that's really tough, right? Like you pointed out. And because we're so conditioned towards fixing. We're so conditioned towards organizing our life, controlling our life. Do I have enough money here? Do I have enough money in retirement? And actually we live in incredible uncertainty. And we just create this illusion that there's not uncertainty. So the pandemic in one way is a really wonderful gift to us, to Dharma practitioners and everyone around, if we can see it for what it is, which is it's really showing us directly the uncertainty of life. And again, do we become completely depressed with that? No, that's pointless, right? But we need to learn how to relate to that uncertainty and it's not really thrive within the uncertainty, it's to cut through our ways of trying to fix and control that uncertainty while also respecting the relative truth. We need to have retirement. We need to have some money. We need to have, healthy relationships. So it's like respecting the relative truth, respecting the emotion, but also not letting it run our life. And so I would just say to the second part, I don't know if it'll come back, or the third part you were talking about, I don't know if it'll come back. And I think the truth is we have no choice. This is just our experience. Our mind created this prison for us, and we need to understand it as a prison and understand what the key is to come out of this prison. And what I'm saying is the key is going through the suffering. The key is going through the experience. So as long as we're doing that, I think it'll turn out well. But somehow if we're pushing the experience away, it will come back most likely. So I don't know in your case, I'm just sort of talking generally, right?
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm curious if anybody has any practice experience you want to share, or just things coming up in the practice you want help being clarified. Because this is, like Lisa was pointing out, this is not, I mean, I use the word intuitive. For me, this is not the most intuitive practice right away, because it's really opposite of what we do a lot of the times.
So Scott, I'll share. I did do the meditation a couple of times this week, and it made me realize how much I am in my head all of the time with all of my Buddhist practices. And no matter what it is, whatever that, and I'm a horrible practitioner. I'm a horrible meditator. I'm very remiss in that. The times that I do try and concentrate on a certain meditation through the Lam Rim, and then you're supposed to, when you really feel it, stay in that, use that concentration. It's like, I don't feel it. So this, for me, has been very, very helpful. But I do have to be constantly vigilant that I'm not going right back to my head.
Yeah.
As soon as an emotion comes up, it's like, it's exactly with what you said of, well, I'm going to fix this. I can help this. Or the other one is, that's a negative emotion. Don't think it. It's creating negative karma. You're going to have to purify it. You're going to go to the hell realms. So then, you go headache, brain tumor kind of thing with that, push that negative emotion away. You can't think that, you can't feel it, you can't say it, and that sort of thing. So this has kind of given me the permission that it's okay to feel it and to experience it and allow it. So
yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Patty. I can really relate with that experience, in a few ways, and I'll just share because maybe it will bring, if it's okay to comment a little bit on what you're going through. Yeah, it is this tricky thing where it's like, when we read, just the Buddhist teaching straight up, it's like, when you encourage a destructive emotion, you're creating the negative karma. It has all these consequences. And so then I think we bring some of our modern Western value systems around suppression of emotions to that, which is actually, in my opinion, a little bit of a misunderstanding. And it's very tricky, though, because when you're translating Dharma from one language to another and multiple cultures, because you don't just have Tibetan culture, you have Himalayan cultures, and also, Indian culture, where it originated out of. And so these are deep feeling cultures, in my opinion, they don't always have the same cultural approach. And again, we're a vast group just here on Zoom. And we're not all of the same culture either. So like, for instance, I mostly live in Latin America these days, and there's just a much different way people relate to emotions. Some of it is similar because it's, modern world and modern education systems and stuff like that, but it's slightly different. And so we just have to see what our proclivity is and try to understand what are we interpreting the Dharma through? And there's nothing you're doing wrong, because I think it's just a process we have to go through. We have to see, how do I realize the Dharma? So just that you are putting the effort into doing that is really wonderful. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just through doing it more. And of course, encountering different teachings and hearing, different people's experience of how they work with these practices, you're going to get more facility and you try different things. But just to give you an example, I was in, when I first became a monk, like I said last week, I went into, Lama Zopa advised me to go into retreat. And he said, okay, so go step by step through the Lam Rim, trying to realize each section at once, right? Like, not an easy job, because it's not just understanding, you're trying to transform your experience into an uncontrived experience of, let's say, perfect human rebirth or death and impermanence. So I sat for 3 months just with perfect human rebirth, and I got to say, like all day long, and Nundro, doing Nundro too, so Nundro practices, and I got to say, it was really, really great. I mean, Perfect Human Rebirth. If you really want an antidote when you're feeling like worthless, this is a wonderful training, as well as, of course, creating fuel to practice the Dharma with more strength. But nonetheless, I sort of didn't know how to bring it into an experience. So it was just kind of thinking more and more thinking and more thoughts. And I think it's not like that's a bad way. I think it's also, again, a cultural background thing. Like, so you have to think of old Tibet. In old Tibet, the majority of the population didn't know how to read, right? The majority of population, they had very little conceptual education, and that was really only found in the monasteries. The nunneries, you wouldn't even find it, right? And now you are, because there's a little bit more equity or being given to women practitioners and nuns, which is wonderful. They're getting trained just like male geshes, right? We have geshe-mas, female geshes now, which is wonderful. But in old Tibet, it's really like the monks who gained the conceptual education. And there was even yogis who didn't really, they might understand the Dharma a little bit, but they work more with the pith instructions, and they can get realization that way too. But nonetheless, there was this emphasis put on conceptual thinking because it was lacking. So there's deep embodiment and deep connection to earth and community, right? But not so much like intelligence, maybe sometimes, right? Maybe a different kind of intelligence, let's just call it that. And so they focus sometimes on educating the head, where we're coming at it with a different angle. We're coming at it with a lot of education and sometimes over-education, where our brain is just full of information. And it's even worse if we're on social media and it's just information all the time, right? And so we need to find some sort of a balance, because it's not like we can just intuit the Lam Rim, just using that as an example, without study. That's kind of impossible, because they are concepts that aren't so obvious. So we do need to study, and we need to, and emptiness specifically, we need to study emptiness a lot to understand, but we need to have the right balance of knowing how to relax into the experience with that, and the right balance with study, right? And so with analytical meditation, it's very, in my opinion, it's very refined, because it's not general. I think it's somewhat personal, how we engage with it, and somewhat cultural. So in my experience, the way I like to do analytical meditation now is just a little bit of a line of something or a thought of something, and I don't need a lot of words. But again, that's after a lot of study. So sometimes that happens once we've studied. We don't need a lot of words. We just need something to trigger the experience. And when the experience gets triggered, we try to just allow that to happen, right? And another thing I would recommend is the more we experience the nature of mind, this really helps too. This really helps, because it opens space. So it's like, instead of trying to realize the Dharma here, we recognize it as panoramic, and then it's allowed to arise within that. So again, tying it back to what we've been talking about so far, this is a wonderful preliminary for starting to like train in another way of being, right? Because we start to open to ourselves, and the Dharma can open, because we're not trying to fit it into a box. Now, again, I'm not saying like I'm correct. All kinds of different teachers have different perspectives, and maybe your personal Lama has a really different perspective, and so ignore me, if that's the case. But I haven't really found depth in my Dharma practice through trying to fit it in a box. I felt like that made me really rigid, judgmental of others, and kind of sectarian, So I don't know, it's a tricky thing, but I'm not saying that's the way it is for everyone. It's all what opens us into, this deeper compassion that's beyond a bias, and this wisdom that has no limit, this wisdom of emptiness that has no place of arising. We can't find it, but yet everything can arise from that. And so that has to happen in our experience, because then we start to find freedom, even a little bit, and then the Dharma starts to click. Otherwise, the Dharma runs the risk of just sort of being a way to beat our ego down, and it reinforces the ego, actually, in my experience. So anyways, maybe too much, but it triggered that for me.
Thank you very much. That resonated a lot. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
We do
Okay.
have a question here in the Gampa, Scott. Could you just expand a little bit and give us maybe a clear verbal example of the handshaking practice?
Yeah. So basically, the first step is drop, right? So we have dropping and then handshaking. So we drop and just rest in the body. This is a lot like I said last week, like you're doing a long hike, taking all of our worries and anxieties with us. When we sit down to take a break, we take the backpack off. But a lot of us we're clinging to this backpack so hard. We need something to break that. So we drop like that. Some physical movement helps, right? We can shake sometimes, that also helps, or just drop into the body, right? And there's no agenda there. There's nothing really to do after that, but meet the experience, right? So that's the dropping. Now, if we have trouble meeting the experience, that's where we have the handshaking, which is training in letting be with the experience. So handshaking basically means one hand, the hand of awareness, is meeting the feeling world, which is the other hand, and shaking, without force, no offense to anyone's political view. It's not a Donald Trump handshake, like that. It's not a, I don't know, whatever handshake you want to say. It's really just like meeting, experiencing, and this is the feeling. The awareness isn't going, you should be Buddhist feeling, you should understand emptiness. No, Bodhichitta, it's not for yourself. Like, it's not doing that. The awareness is just here and allowing the feeling to do what it wants, but we don't lose the awareness. So that's handshaking, the hand of awareness, meeting the feeling and just allowing the feeling to move, whatever, do what it wants, right? And then there's these four kind of modes or four applications of mindfulness when we're working with being with the feeling, which is we're remembering not to suppress, we're remembering not to become, we're remembering not to run away from the experience, and then fourth, we're practicing or remembering not fixing, controlling, manipulating in any kind of way, right? So that fourth one is really the essence of the practice, and it's also the most challenging. So it takes practice, right? I want to be clear, again, because some of you might do this and feel this isn't for me, it's too hard. Of course it's not going to be easy right away, because we have to practice it, right? For me, this is really tough in the beginning. I think it took 3 months just to start to get an aha moment where like, oh yeah, I can be with my feeling without thinking about it, right? That took about 3 months for me, of a lot of practice. And I'm not saying it's going to take that long for you, but it takes time. So that's the handshake practice, the dropping and the handshake in a nutshell. And, really these trainings, these four applications of not suppressing, not indulging, not becoming, and not running away. Sorry, not suppressing, not indulging, not running away, or not trying to fix or control. Like when we're not doing those, we're actually letting be. So I want to point that out. Letting be is the absence of those four. But we can use them as kind of a mindfulness training in the beginning to understand the difference or to experience the difference between truly letting be and actually just doing our old patterns, right? That's why we have the teaching. The teaching always is just a finger pointing, in the direction you want to go. So that's essentially it, I hope that helps to make it clear.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry, there's one more thing that I'll talk about briefly, but if you really want to kind of connect more with this, I recommend, listening to Soka Rinpoche's teachings. He also has an online course called Fully Being, where he goes through all this stuff. And it's they have like a free version that's 10 days long. And then if you like that, I think there's paid versions that are really affordable, and it's really good. They've been working on it for 3 or 4 years. But it's this other component, just briefly, he calls essence love. And so this is a whole other area, maybe I don't have time to go into, but the result of learning to let be, of training and letting be, is not only more freedom with our emotions, more skill, obviously, with how to work with them, but we also uncover a quality of our being he calls essence love. And so essence love, it's not loving kindness. It's not like, on top of the world bliss. It's not the love we give to the others. It's the basis or the root of love. And what it is this experience of okayness, contentment, and sometimes what Sogyam Rinpoche calls being happy for no reason, right? Happy for no reason. There's no condition providing the happiness. And so via handshaking practice, when we train in letting be with our experience over a period of time, I can't say how long, it just depends on the person, we start to bring this quality of essence love out. And essence love is not, it's not a big, profound experience. It's just a sense of contentment. Actually, it's very human. That's why I'm using this as a preliminary. It's not necessarily even a Buddhist thing. You meet people with essence love sometimes in very, very simple places, where they don't have a lot of material complexity and conditioning. They might have other problems, of course, as a human being, but they have this sense of being relaxed and open and connected to people in their environment, right? So sometimes I meet those kind of people in indigenous places or areas, or sometimes just like here in Colombia, campesinos sometimes, though they could have other things going on that also are part of suffering, but not in the emotion. They're just experiencing. So, and really a good example of this is very small kids, I mean, have you ever thought why we take joy in watching a really small kid play or, run around a room or something like that? Think about this a little bit. Why does this bring us joy? I don't know for you, but for me, I'm watching a being with full essence love. They just have contentment. They don't care if it's dirt they're playing with, or a wood toy or a plastic toy or something that's $200 or something that costs 2 cents. They learn to find joy with whatever's there, right? And of course, again, kids have other issues too, so I'm not saying it's perfect. But this inner contentment, this inner essence love, is something we all were born with. And it's something that gets lost as we go into conditioned reality more and more. So this is one practice to retrieve it, right? So that's the other element of this. We drop, we work with handshaking without an expectation, and then slowly over time, essence love can come out. But we're not trying to like, ooh, I wonder what the essence love is. How do I get it? Maybe if I practice 8 hours a day on this, I'm going to get it faster. Don't think like that. Drop the expectations and it'll come if you just do it. So again, just to add to the question to kind of complete this teaching. Okay, what time is it? Oh, perfect timing. So good. This is mostly what I wanted to do today, was kind of check in with you, see how the practice is going, make sure you are clear with the practice so you can really bring it into your life, right? I also wanted to start to tie in the what we call the path of liberation, right? What maybe some of you know as traditional Buddhism or traditional Dharma. So we started to tie that in today, first with Refuge and Bodhichitta, which are to be felt, right? And then we started to tie that in with really talking about this aspect of working skillfully with emotions as seeing the emotion for what it is, right? So I have these questions for you. Is Buddhism a practice of trying to be a good Buddhist? Is Buddhism a practice of belief? Is Buddhism a practice of doing everything correctly and then you can attain enlightenment? We have to ask ourselves these questions. But is Buddhism a practice of just doing whatever we want? Obviously, no. There's some context, there's some boxes we work with. But the boxes are to get out of the box. This is why the Buddhist path is so special to me personally. And it's, again, I'm biased and I'm not saying it's, better than anything else, but for me it is, for me personally, because for me, what really works is a path of realization and experience and teachings on how to liberate ourselves from suffering that actually makes itself redundant. Meaning, if the path turns us into a pather, what's the point, right? The Buddha said this many times in many sutras. So for instance, the Buddha said, in the Vajracutter Sutra, he says, if even the Dharma is to be abandoned when you attain the other shore, which means you attain enlightenment, what say of like small things like attachment to food or attachment to loved ones or attachment to material things? So he said, if even eventually we abandon our attachment to the Dharma, it's not really abandon the Dharma because we become the Dharma when we attain enlightenment, right? We embody it fully. We are the Dharma when we're awakened. But we abandon the clinging to that, right? Because that clinging also becomes a fetter. So again, myself and probably most of you, we're not close to this right now, and that's okay. But remembering it is really helpful because it helps us along the path to be diligent in our practice, to try to study well, reflect well, and meditate well, right? To do the practice we need to move forward, and having the right components, the right cup for the tea, and we put the tea and all that. But at the same time, be relaxed, right? And just let the practice, let the practice grow and let it unfold and bear fruit, right? And so another way to put this is, for me, the Buddhist path is a path of adopting temporary beliefs to go beyond belief. So I'll say that again. For me, it's a path of adopting temporary beliefs to go beyond beliefs. And when we understand that, we really understand the crux of the Dharma. And by the way, we start to understand the dance of relative and absolute truth. This is the dance of relative and absolute truth. We need the relative, just as we need our car to go to work, or we need food so we don't die, or water. We need the path. We need the specificities of how we engage the Dharma path: bodhicitta, emptiness, renunciation mind. These are the three principal aspects of the path. We need these. We need all the methods. We need the methods to start to grow that, right? But if we get stuck in the methods, we lose the absolute. But if we get stuck in the absolute, we also lose the methods. So we need the right balance of this, right? So we are training to become free, right? That's what it is. We're training to become free. But understanding that freedom takes some time, right? It's not easy to understand, well, what is freedom? Does freedom mean I don't experience destructive emotions anymore? Yes, you could say like a Buddha doesn't. But at the same time, they did that through seeing that the emotion is also the nature of reality. They didn't do that by pushing it out. Here's the emotion over here, and the nature of reality is here. This sucks, and this is good. No, it's all part of the same thing. And the more we start to understand that, both our conceptual understanding and our experience, we start to become free, right? So again, this is found a little bit more in the Mahamudra teachings, but at the same time, you see it throughout the sutras. It's not necessarily only a Vajrayana thing. You see it in the Vajracutter Sutra, in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. You see it in the Heart Sutra, right? Being pointed out again and again. So this is where we're going to start to go in the next two classes. I'm just sort of warming us up to this, right? So to prepare for that, what I want you to do is continue this practice now that we kind of hopefully there's like a little bit more context and a little bit more practice to get used to what I'm talking about with this preliminary of learning to let be, to handshake, etc. So I want you to practice that if you can. And, I'm not interested in giving people intellectual Dharma teachings. I'm not a good teacher for this. There's really good geshes and kempos and people trained in a lot of philosophy. Go to them for this. So what I'm interested in is people gaining experience, right? So how to use some of the context of talking about the Dharma here and how to work with emotions to bring it into your experience, to find some liberation, to find some freedom. But you can't do that just from thinking about it or just listening to me. The point of listening to me is to bring it into the practice. So I'm being kind of direct now, right? And I'm not your teacher or your guru. I'm just a friend, like your Dharma friend. But I'm really advocating for this now with people because I see this is the biggest obstacle. We don't create the freedom to practice in our life, and we waste a lot of time. So just try your best. Don't beat yourself up. Just try your best and try to do it with joy, right? That you have this Buddha nature that you can experience. And the more time you put into that, the more you can experience it, the more you can uncover it. And you'll find a lot of joy there rather than pressure. Oh, I got to do something else. I got to be something else. Try to find joy in the practice. And this means whatever you can do, however small, do it. And then let that grow organically. But please do it, right? Otherwise, it's just me speaking words. It's just hearing words and that's it, right? Make sense? Too harsh? Okay. So let's dedicate the merit. And like I said, the next 2 times we'll go into a little bit more like bodhicitta side and emptiness side, how to work with emotions.
Great, Scott. Right before we dedicate, before everyone starts packing up their stuff and going, I would like to say, if you're in the Gampa or you're in the class on Zoom and you haven't registered, no problem whatsoever. But for me to be able to send you to the recording, I will need your email address. So I am going to put my email address in here.
You guys want to say hi? Yeah.
And please, no, I think I got it. Please send me an email if you are not registered and if I don't have your email address, so I can do that. And thank you very much, Scott. And I will put up the prayers now. Thank you.
Thanks, but my friends are gonna say hi real quick before we.
Oh, good.
Dedication.
Okay.
So then we can have some connection from here in Colombia to wherever you guys are. Comes just waving the camera. Hi.
Hi. It's great to see all of you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. They
Gracias.
provided a nice space to host the teaching today. So
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you.
okay, we can dedicate the merit now. Sorry, I went over a little bit. And I think just for time, we'll just do it in Tibetan today. Gewa di nyurdu da mama sangye drukirni drowa shikyan malo pa dei saba gupar sho chancho samcho rinpoche make parnam gyurchi kewa nyampa me pa yang gonde gondu pawar sho Jikten kamdir pende malu pa gama jungwe sampel yijin nor kadrin sume tenzing gatso la sowa debso jole lundrum sho tubzo janjin jangon yawe tenzing kyo pewe kunzo do porze choksun korwe legmon to dropa Takso doje gondo japen sho. Thank you so much, everyone. Looking forward to next week. Ciao. Hasta luego.
Ciao. Hasta luego.
Thank you
Hasta luego.
so much. Thank you. It was great. Thank you.